From the band, no. There was no inkling at all whatsoever. You know, that's still a mystery today.
Maybe the drumming was used as an excuse to get rid of him. Unfairly.
Not influencing it, it's a public decision. That's why I turn around and say, right, I'm not a bad drummer. Okay, let the people make their own mind up about that.
10 songs from the new Beatles Anthology CD feature Pete on drums. So not only is Pete Best a Beatle once again, the royalties from those songs will at last bring him some of the Beatles' riches, estimated at between $10 and $100 million.
For a man who might well have spent his twilight years bitter and bereft, Pete Best today cuts a remarkably serene figure. His departure from the Beatles in 1962 has long been framed as one of rock history's cruelest moments, an almost Shakespearean twist of fate in which the brooding young drummer was summarily dismissed just before the band rocketed into a cultural phenomenon that would rewrite the rules of music, fame, and fortune. He missed the whirlwind. He missed the money, or so the story went for decades. But that's not quite the full picture. Now 83 and newly retired from performing, Best steps away not as a footnote, but as a man who eventually made peace with his past, and, to the surprise of many, managed to earn a not inconsiderable sum from the very band that let him go. Randolph Peter Best was born in Madras, then British India, in 1941, and settled in Liverpool with his family after the war. His mother, Mona Best, opened the Casbah Coffee Club in the basement of their home, a venue that would become a vital staging post in the rise of Merseybeat. It was there that the Quarrymen, fronted by John Lennon, began to find their feet. When the Beatles, at that time Lennon, McCartney, Harrison, and bass player Stuart Sutcliffe, were offered an extended booking in Hamburg in 1960, they needed a drummer. Best, then, playing in the Blackjacks, was hired on McCartney's recommendation. His first gig with the Beatles took place on the 17th of August 1960 at the Indra Club on Hamburg's Grosse Freiheit. He was the only drummer we knew who had a drum kit, George Harrison later said, half-jokingly. Best played with the band through their formative years, during which they developed from a raw but energetic club act into a tight, charismatic rock and roll unit. He survived grueling stints in Hamburg, backed singers like Tony Sheridan, and helped build the early mystique that surrounded the Beatles among Liverpool's club crowds. He even cut studio demos with the band, most notably the 1962 Decca audition, which would later take on near-mythic status. Then, suddenly, it was over. In August 1962, just months before the band's first Parlophone single was released, Best was unceremoniously replaced by Ringo Starr. The precise reasons have been debated ever since. Officially, producer George Martin was unimpressed with Best's drumming during a June recording session and requested a session player.
It's Pete. He thinks he's the weak link in the band. If he signs us, he will insist on using another drummer for the recording sessions.
There have been so many excuses, but we've had no actual reason as to why Peter should leave. As I say, success is hard to come by, and these things do happen. But it's just the way that it was done that has annoyed us.
The band, sensing a moment of truth, opted to let him go altogether. Behind the scenes, tensions had been bubbling. Best was a quiet, self-contained presence who, according to McCartney, didn't share the same mad sense of humour that bonded the others. "We were cowards," Lennon admitted in a 1970 interview. "We didn't sack him properly."
The reason I was given I wasn't a good enough drummer. People who saw me play then and people who've seen me play since then have turned around and said, no, that wasn't a decision.
Rumours swirled that he was too good-looking, too popular with fans, and perhaps not quite one of the lads.
Clash of personalities, well, probably that may be it, because Peter did have a terrific fan club, compared to the others.
Too good-looking, perhaps, eh?
Well, I'll leave that for the other people to say, but if it had been done a bit more straightforward, it would have been more to the mark.
"I felt I was cast out," Best later said, "not just from the band, but from a dream, and there were no answers." He sank into depression. In 1965, amid mounting emotional strain and media hounding, he attempted suicide. His mother, Mona, found him and intervened. He survived, but the experience cast a long shadow. I was living in the aftermath, he reflected. Everywhere I went, people asked me about the Beatles, and every time I thought I'd moved on, someone brought it all back.
You know, drummer wasn't too good, the beat wasn't so hot. You know.
After leaving the Beatles, Best briefly joined Lee Curtis and the All-Stars before leading his own group, first the Pete Best 4, then the Pete Best Combo. They toured the US and recorded several tracks, including the cheekily titled Best of the Beatles, a name that confused many and even prompted complaints from fans who thought it was a compilation album. While the music was earnest and occasionally inspired, it never caught fire commercially. Best found himself increasingly distant from the stage and eventually abandoned music altogether, settling into life as a civil servant. He worked at a job centre in Liverpool and lived an ordinary, if overshadowed, existence.
With 2 young daughters to support, Pete quit show business and joined the civil service as a clerk at the unemployment office. He put in 20 years, but when he retired in 1988, he picked up his drumsticks again.
I'd go to the shops and someone would say, "Aren't you that guy?" he told the Irish Times, and I'd smile and say, "Yes, I was, but now I'm just Pete." Then came a curious twist. In 1995, the Beatles released Anthology 1, a sprawling retrospective of demos, live cuts, and studio outtakes charting their rise from skiffle obscurity to global phenomenon. Among the tracks were 10 recordings featuring Best on drums, including the fabled Decca audition.
10 songs from the new Beatles Anthology CD feature Pete on drums. So not only is Pete Best a Beatle once again, the royalties from those songs will at last bring him some of the Beatles' riches, estimated at between $10 and $100 million.
Suddenly, Pete Best was a Beatle again, and this time there was money on the table. The precise figure has been disputed over the years. A long-standing rumour, often repeated but rarely sourced, claimed he earned upwards of £9 million in royalties from the release. Best himself was more circumspect. In a 2020 interview he remarked, "It was a nice surprise, let's put it that way, not far short of £1 million in pounds." Other sources, including industry insiders and publishing experts, have suggested the amount may have ultimately reached between £2 and £4 million over time, taking into account global sales, digital downloads and licensing rights. "It changed things, not just financially," he said. "It was like a weightlifting. For the first time I felt acknowledged."
If all of it comes to fruition and all these speculation is, millionaire, multi-millionaire, billionaire, if it does, I'll be happy, okay. Regardless of that, it's still giving me a lot of enjoyment, and that's what's counting at the present moment.
Then that opens up the enclave into what the decision was. And then you got all the other bits, jealousy, hairstyle, blah, 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 it goes on.
For years, Best's story had been told for him, often inaccurately, sometimes mockingly. The Anthology project allowed him to step into the spotlight on his own terms. His name appeared in the credits. His image was resurrected in documentaries and liner notes. Fans who had only heard of him in whispers finally got to hear him play. And for the first time since 1962, he took to the road again, this time fronting the Pete Best Band, a family-led ensemble that toured the world playing early Beatles numbers and rock classics. "It took 30-odd years," Best quipped in a 2006 interview, "but I finally got my Beatlemania." From conventions in Las Vegas to theatre shows in Tokyo, he was met not with pity, but with adulation. Younger fans queued for autographs. Collectors brought vintage memorabilia to be signed. He became something of a cult figure, the Beatle who never was, but who had at last found his crowd, and perhaps most crucially, he never seemed bitter. When asked about the band that cut him loose, Best was philosophical. "I don't hate them," he said. "We were young lads. They made a decision. It hurt, but life goes on."
He's never had the chance to talk to John, Paul, George, or Ringo again. even though they'd been close friends since age 14. All Pete has left are these photographs that we acquired.
The Beatles themselves rarely spoke publicly about Best's fate. McCartney, when pressed, described it as unfortunate but necessary. Harrison noted that it just wasn't working. Only Lennon acknowledged the emotional toll of the decision, calling it cruel but part of growing up. Even George Martin expressed some regret. "I had no intention of getting Pete fired," he said in a BBC interview. "I simply suggested using a studio drummer. The decision to replace him was theirs." That distinction matters. For all the mythology, Best wasn't fired by a record label or a shadowy executive. He was dropped by his mates. That, perhaps more than the loss of fame or fortune, was what stung the most. In March 2025, at the age of 83, Pete Best announced his retirement from performing. The news was met with genuine affection from fans and former colleagues alike. "Well, what an absolutely wonderful ride we've had," his brother and bandmate Rogue wrote on social media. However, everything comes to pass. My brother Pete Best has announced today he is retiring from personal appearances and performing with the group. His daughter has informed me it's due to personal circumstances. Best reposted the message with typical understatement, "I had a blast. Thank you." There is, in Pete Best's story, something quietly triumphant. He was, for years, described as the unluckiest man in music. But perhaps that was always too neat a label, the sort of line one finds on pub quiz cards and trivia calendars. In truth, he carved a second life from rejection. He built a family, a career, and eventually a legacy. He played the long game. And though the millions came late, they came nonetheless. Asked once whether he'd swap it all to have been part of the Beatles' heyday, Best gave a surprising answer. "Not now. Maybe before. But I've had two lives, and not many people get that."
Were there any hard feelings?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you turn around and said that never happened, I mean, you'd be lying through the back of your face, wouldn't you? I mean, it was inevitable, there were moments, you know. I mean, the times when you looked at it and said, you know, could have been part of it.